Greystar, with their 850,000 units, they have a master insurance policy, which I did not know when I underwrote the deal. This was a large transaction, 360 units. We were underwriting insurance to $2,000 a unit, so we're talking about a $720,000 insurance bill. And I called Greystar. I said, I know you guys have this master policy. Will you look at my property? They ended up getting me a quote on their master policy for $1,000 a unit, saving me $360,000 a year insurance, which was roughly a $6 million increase in the valuation of the property before I even bought it. So I chose to work with Greystar. Like I said, I don't think there's anyone from Greystar here. From a management perspective, it's been a disaster. They're really not interested in me or my property. Thankfully, we're doing very, very well because we have a good staff on site. We're very involved. And even the amount of money I would say I'm losing as a result of using them is more than made up with the benefits we had from the insurance. So there are, it's always important to pivot and look for different angles. But ultimately, I would say that's the outlier. Usually you want to use a local company with boots on the ground that's going to care about your property, be invested in it, and together, working with them, you'll hopefully be able to cut expenses and manage efficiently.
Awesome. So in terms of finding a good manager, I'm going to pivot to the two managers and start with Joe. And Joe, we picked you. And I could say about what was your special sauce, why we did it. But I'd like you to go into a little bit like what the selling points are of an us versus them, and maybe go into a little bit of the vertical integration that your company has and why that is or isn't important for property owners to care about.
Right. So some people are of the opinion that you should do one thing and focus on one thing. I'm of the opinion that you find the right people and you corner every part of the market within your business, assuming you have the right people.
So why don't we stop for a second and give the people a list of the services that you have in-house?
So from
architecture, the whole thing.
So we're a licensed insured GC. We're capable of pulling permits and building projects ourselves as needed, and we had experience doing that for a while. Although now we're mostly outsourcing our larger projects. We have a property management arm that's compartmentalized into 5 divisions. We have accounting, bookkeeping, compliance, leasing, renewals, the field, which entails portering, repairs, maintenance. We have, what am I missing? Compliance. That'll come to me. But we have 5 divisions. Everything is segmented. Everybody's handling one aspect in one area, and that's all they do all day. That's what they focus on. And they have a front office support as well as back office support. So everything has a front touch and a back end touch. We have a in-house real estate brokerage that has 3 divisions. One is multifamily investment sales, residential rentals, and retail leasing. So when we get a building, we're able to get our opinions pretty quick. We're able to get our tenants pretty quick because we can pretty much leverage and take a tenant from this building to that building, or get a lead from this person to that person to fill up our units a lot quicker. And then we have the ancillary companies, like the plumbing and environmental. We just found that was our largest cost as a multifamily operator in New York City. That was our largest bill. So it helps us keep our costs down, as well extend credit to our owners as well as ourselves to be able to sustain the buildings and keep them going.
So I think one of the things that for me was important there was the trust factor, right? So I trust you, but now I have to extend it to the outsourced third-party person that you're hiring, as opposed to me being able to say, okay, Joe's handling this, he's handling my brokerage, he's handling lots of other things, and to me, I found like that was just like a really good like sell on the vertical integration. Nathan, you built a big business, and I understand that one of the secrets that you had was making everyone feel like their building is your building. So as you've grown, how do you continue that feeling with your clients? And how do you put that feeling through your organization?
In my in-house, but in my office, it's the way we are operating. It's our model, the way we are training all our staff. You're asking me a question on a big scale. How can you show ownership that you are you're close to the property, you're creative? I'm going to tell you a story, and I think it's going to talk for itself. We took over a building in East Brunswick, New Jersey. It's 400,000 square feet. It's called Tower 2. One of the expenses in the building, when we looked at the budget, we took it over, there was $140,000 a year expense, because legally you have to have a fire marshal 24 hours a day in the building, by law. We have a manager before, one of the corporate tenant, as I mentioned before, and this was going on for a lot of years. $140,000, it was part of the expenses of the building. We took it over, I looked at the expenses, and I was thinking to myself, why do I have to pay $140,000 for a fire marshal? I have a security team in the building, around the clock. Maybe I can use one of them. What does it entail? What do I need? So I sent down my guy to the town in East Brunswick, and I asked the question, what is needed? The answer was, it was a simple questionnaire, and if they answered it and they passed it, they can be a fire marshal. I got 3 fire marshals within the first week, which was on the shifts, and within the first month that we took over the building, there was $140,000 expense off the books. Now, the corporate $140,000 a year.
A year.
Now, the management before us could have done it. They didn't even bother to look. It's corporate, it's an expense, this is the law, this is how it goes. When I looked at it, my team looked at it, we look at every expense. Is it necessary? Is it not? We are trying to be creative. So that's an example, even on the scale where we are right now, we still look at each property from an owner's perspective, and we are much more creative than just following what we have to do.
So, to me, it just sounds like, I mentioned last night to you, it sounds like he's a restaurant owner, and he sees the mashgiach standing there, not doing anything. Okay, I'm paying this guy $60,000, $70,000. Maybe he can cut the lettuce also. So that's a little bit of what it sounds like what you did. So, that's what popped into my head. So it's really interesting that hiring the right manager, it was a $6 million bump. For you, it was $140,000 a year, straight to your client's pocket.
I'm going to give you another example. We had in one of our buildings, I had an HVAC problem. It was a big problem. It's not small units. It's a tower on top of the building, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars to replace it. You know, the cooling towers. And they came down, they looked at it, no choice, we have to replace it. It's 30 years old. And it was a lot of the back and forth. The bottom line was, we figured out a way to put in a new switchboard into the system, and we got another 5 years out of that tower. This alone is hundreds of thousands of dollars. Again, this is something with a corporate management. They did their job. They called the vendors. They gave the quotes. This is what has to be done. That's the difference between looking at each expense, if it's CapEx or something else, and you make sure it is necessary, and you try to do whatever you can to keep it down.
Okay, so Joe, I heard 2 stories, one from a manager, one from a client, of how either they saved the building or they saved hundreds of thousands, adding millions of dollars in value. I've seen you do this for our building, so I'm going to put you on the hot seat and tell you, give me a story kind of like that.
So we had a building that we purchased, actually from Lev was the broker on the transaction. Alpha Realty, give him a shout out.
Shout out to Lev.
When we purchased the property, our idea was to convert the property from a commercial to residential, since the area was predominantly a residential area, and the rents on the residential were significantly higher than the commercial rents, or so we thought. So we filed plans for the building to convert to residential. We're 4 or 5 months in the process. Examiner says everything looks good. We're about to wrap up. Towards the end, the examiner came back to us, said, unfortunately, we're going to have to require you to put an elevator in a building that's 20 feet wide. So as you all know, on a 20-footer, or many of you know, on a 20-footer, if you put an elevator, it really destroys the whole core and the shell of the building. So while we took over at that point in time, we were stuck. Our business plan was residential, and I happened to own the building as well. Had some partners there. The second we purchased the property, since we have retail in-house, we listed the property for lease as a retail space. And we were able to fill the entire building with retail commercial tenants and have a much higher rent roll. We pivoted, in that option period and leased up the building, and we refinanced about 2 to 3 weeks ago. We went from a 3% rate environment to a 6.3% rate environment, and we're able to cash out significant amount of money in a really good market.
Okay, awesome. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about tenanting. By the way, how much time do we have here? Is anyone keeping track? All right, nobody's falling asleep. We'll keep going a little bit. How much time? 15 minutes. Okay. Okay, so I want to talk about tenanting.
Almost off the hook. All right.
We can keep going. We can go. We can do it. At some point, we might open up questions for the audience. So think about questions. I'm going to save the last 5 minutes for that. I'm going to shift the burden from me to you. Okay, so I want to talk about tenanting. So one of the major parts of management is having the properties maximally tenanted with the best tenants. So I'd like to start from Nathan and then come in this direction, and starting with commercial tenants, what are we looking for? What do we care about? And is that the responsibility of the property manager? So,
as Jason said before, the responsibility is on the asset management team, obviously. But since we do the management and we do the leasing service as well, we have experience over the years. I'm going to start with retail. Any retail property, if you want to make sure it's a safe property, meaning it's a safe investment, you have to divide it between an anchor tenant, which is a national tenant. It's much lower rent per square foot, but on the other hand, it's much more secure, obviously. Now you have the mom and pop tenants, which is not as secure, but the main profit is coming from there. So the way we divide it, we want to make sure we have enough anchor tenants, national or regional tenants, which covers the basic expenses, which is the loan, monthly contracts, etc. Your profit should come from the mom and pop. Even if something happens with them, you're not going to make profit, but it's not going to cost you every month. That's number one. Number two, you would like to make sure that the mix is very well. Till, 10 years ago, it was all retail, Macy's, Kmart, etc. Best Buys. Today, a lot of these tenants are online, which we all know. We want to make sure it's a mix of food, groceries, which is very important, medical, urgent cares, a fitness, which is LA Fitness, 24-hour fitness, etc. If it has the right mix, sometimes when you have a potential lease coming in, you can have a retail tenant which could give you much more per square foot, much less TI, is going to add to the value of the property. I will still recommend ownership. No, it's not a good fit it's too many national tenants, too many retail tenants. You have to get a mix of something else. And most of the time, it's not me, meaning my leasing team was right by recommending the right thing. That's a retail.
So it's not only who's willing to pay the most money.
That's correct.
Okay.
You have to make sure it's a good fit. It comes to office. Today's day and age, a lot of people are working from home. They are downsizing. They're not taking that more. So you have to make sure that your plans, when you remodel a building, it should be more oriented to smaller spaces. It's much easier. You can do it much more short term, in and out. So you always have to make adjustment according to the market.
If either of you want to take that, I think interesting in New York, right? So the commercial tenants, if they don't pay, you get them out, right? In New York, if a residential tenant doesn't pay, they still moved in. They're there with you for a long time. So, Joe, talk a little bit about vetting tenants for us and like understand what we should look for in terms of what we should tell our property managers to look for, or what we should be looking for as well.
So, since we're owners as well, our vetting process is very, very thorough, because if you're stuck with a tenant, as Jason said earlier, you could be stuck with them for, 50 or 60 years?
48 years.
48 years. You get stuck with your tenant for 48 years.
Being optimistic. Yeah.
And that's being optimistic.
Yeah.
So you really have to, sometimes you get stuck with a tenant, you buy a building with a tenant, and you're just married to them until you resolve that problem. So we have like a several-step vetting process on residential tenants, where we meet them in person, we ask them specific questions, look at their prior apartments, see if they have violations on their current unit, see if the tenants have any legal cases recently, whether it be holdover or any legal issues. We're looking at very specific information about these tenants, and gauging them from several different levels, from in person to where they live and how they live, and that will be our determination. On top of that, depending on the market, obviously like a Park Slope market or in the better areas where we have properties, we require, tenants to make income of 40 times the rent, 700 credit score or greater, and we're relying on the fact that, they're working for top-tier companies or have sufficient income and credit, where if they don't pay, then we have something to go after. But I gotta say that in our Park Slope buildings, our Manhattan buildings, we have almost no evictions, like almost none. And the ones that we usually resolve, and we end up getting the money anyways down the road with defaults. In markets like the Bronx, where tenants are subsidized, when in some cases they're paying the money out of their pocket, they may or may not have the money to pay the rent. So a lot of times the city is paying, you're stuck with that tenant for a long time, because the city keeps throwing checks at these tenants just to keep them in the game, just to pay down their arrears enough to keep them going for years and years to come, which is paid for by our tax dollars. Thank you, City of New York. And that's really it. That's why it's very important to vet every single tenant that moves into your building, whether it be commercial, residential. That's the name of the game in New York City. Versus in Jason's market, it's, a little, you don't have to be as cautious. You still have to be cautious. But if a tenant doesn't pay, they're out in 48 hours.
You think that's true, Jason? Is that, you said 48 hours. So when you're looking at tenants, or you have your management companies looking at tenants out of state versus in New York, what are the differences there?
They're pretty substantial. So, we have similar rental qualifications like Joe has with regard to credit and income.
Are they lower out of state?
In New York, New York, yeah. So again, it depends on the location. We're seeing right now, for example, we're buying a property now in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale. We don't have to be as vigilant in our background checks. We have the same qualifications, but we're also seeing a tremendous amount of fraud. That applications coming in from apartments with people presenting fake IDs, misrepresented income. So really, you have to be careful. In any major market, there's certain things you have to be careful for, which are not as prevalent in secondary or tertiary markets. In certain areas, 48 hours is not an exaggeration. But every state, and even within states, there are different jurisdictions. There are different amounts of time. And Southwest Florida, we have a property. We recently evicted someone took 3 weeks to evict a tenant for not paying their late fees. So, who ever heard about collecting late fees in New York City? But these are, there are certain things in place that actually require tenants to have to, believe it or not, if you're only in New York, to actually have to pay their bills.
So we have some successful and smart people on this panel, and they've answered the questions. They've answered the question I've asked them. But I'd like to stop for a minute and ask them each to give a little bit of advice, kind of to the crowd out here, property owners and people involved in real estate. And maybe we'll start with Nathan. I had a question for you, but we'll just let you go and do your own thing. If you have like a word of advice you'd leave the people with from here.
The only advice I can give, take one thing you're good at, you think you're good at, work on it, stay focused on it, and just keep on going and do all the tweaks necessary to be better and better and better. And along the line, it's very, very tempting to start another division and another division. So for an example, in my case, I had a lot of opportunities over the years to go into residential. I had an account, an offer from somebody, like I think in Linden, New Jersey, it was thousands of units. It will be, at that point, a new division for my company. It was tempting, and I made a decision, no, this is where I put in my work, this is what I'm good at, this is what I trained my staff, and I'm staying focused on this and on this only. And Baruch Hashem, it's already 12 years later. That's this one. And number two, when you start a business and the business grows, and just make sure that the money that comes into the business, put it right back into the business. Very tempting, you start seeing you're making a lot of money, you want to take it out. Be careful, put it back, do whatever is necessary, more professional, better software, better staff, high-end, etc., etc. And when the time is right, then you're going to have time to take out some money from the business. To have the discipline to stay focused on one thing and make sure to reinvest until the time is right.
So my father...
Daven, 1 second, and the most important thing, you should daven every single day and ask Hashem for Hatzlacha.
Okay. So my dad reinforced those the last points for me. He said, one, make sure you're praying for your parnasah every day, and number two, never tell your wife how much you make, because if you're doing well, she's going to spend it. No offense to ladies here, I'm sure you're the breadwinners. Don't tell your husbands how much you make, all right, whoever it is, whoever your other person is. Okay. Joseph.
So number one, I would say is you need to have a belief in God to, number one, I think first and foremost. If you don't have that, then you don't have that clear mind. But, for the younger people that are getting into the industry and starting out, I would say try to give people more than what you expect to take out. Don't make it a give-take. I think a lot of my success came from trying to do more for people than what I expect to make from them. And that relationship allowed me to grow over a long period of time, combined with really hard work, dedication, commitment. If you combine those two, I think you'll really be successful in the long run. If you're a business owner and you have a company, I think the biggest element of your success is the people around you. Don't be afraid to reward people around you. Let people grow around you. If you can create a lot of millionaires, you'll become a billionaire, right? So that's the idea. You want your people around you to be successful and give them the growth. So this way they're personally invested with you and you're able to do a lot more.
Okay, Jason, I've been waiting 10 years to hear the answer to this question from you. The whole thing, this whole panel was just this one question, so I could hear about your advice. I'll take it personally.
It's changed over 10 years,
okay.
But at the risk of not getting invited back and maybe offending some of my broker friends, do not buy in New York City. Okay, that's my first piece of advice.
But if you do, borrow from me. I think that was
that's
the...
exactly. Maybe Ezra can create some value on the lending side, but
if you do, only from Joe.
Right. That's number one. Number two, I think most importantly is integrity. It's integrity with if you're a syndicator, most of us I think are raising money, with your investors, with your lenders. We've obviously heard about some unfortunate stories that have come out recently. I have only seen personally, the more honest, the more direct, the more transparent you are, the more bracha it brings, and the more success it brings as well. So do not cut corners. There are plenty of opportunities to do it. It's simply not worth it. It doesn't end up usually working out in the long run either. And I think ultimately, do your best to make a Kiddush Hashem. I had a story, which I didn't tell you. I was talking to a broker in Texas who, I guess somehow, maybe you saw I have an office in Muncie. He said, oh yeah, he said, I've recently done a deal with a couple of you guys. He said he had such positive experiences with 2 Orthodox Jews that he recently had done deals with, that he said that it was such a positive experience and transaction that he actually directed the deal in my direction because of these experiences he had had.
Wow.
And it just made me realize that we really have a responsibility all to each other to make a Kiddush Hashem, be honest, be straightforward, and it'll bring results not only for you but for other people as well.
That was great. Okay, so if we have any questions from the audience, yeah, there we go, hand up. Okay, well, we'll be the judge of that.
Easier question. You mentioned being in different markets. So I'm curious, when you go into a new market, so Louisiana, Texas, Florida, or wherever, if you're not familiar with the market, how do you vet out management companies, besides obviously getting pro formas and numbers, but how do you really vet a new management company or find new management companies instead of just waiting to see if it ends up being good or bad, which could take a while?
Not only is that a great question, but I think
it was one of the questions that
it's on his
we were
list.
running out of time. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Great minds.
Yeah, think alike. Yeah, so it's not easy. It's not easy. It's mostly done. Again, we have a pretty strong network of friends, colleagues, other investors. I've always found when you ask, people are willing to help, right? So always important to get references and referrals. It could be that you'll start working with someone that doesn't work out. That goes back to what I said before on the asset management side. Very important to be on top of operations and make sure that they are performing responsibly. But there are a lot of good, reliable companies out there that can do a great job as long as you are keeping proper
Accounting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Anyone?
Lev, good question.
We have Lev. Okay, stand up, Lev.
Why don't you introduce Lev, by the way?
Well, Lev, why don't you make an introduction?
Thank you. I don't need an introduction. Jason, the New York City thing I took a little personally. I have a question.
Lev, you actually, whenever we deal with institutional investors, they ask for our track record. Lev sold a building for me in 2015. I think that we had a 278 IRR, right?
Over what period of time?
Obviously very short.
Okay.
But
if it was a 7-year hold, I'd be really impressed. All right.
It was like a 7-month hold.
Okay, still impressed. Yeah.
No, but it's on? Yeah. It's on. Okay, Jason, I want to ask you a question. So you're out in New York City. A lot of owners, you're right, after the 2019 rent laws transition nationwide. What do you think, other than the rent laws, because we don't know when it's going to change, but is there anything else that would kind of like shift you and bring you back to New York City? I think you actually thought about coming back to New York City recently, and it wasn't because the rent laws are changing. So just curious, what do you need to see to kind of like reshift your strategy back to New York City?
So brokers always try and vet out those guys who's reaching out to them for deals and isn't really serious. When I reached out to you, you obviously were unsuccessful about me. More recently, we're not serious. We always look for opportunity. I can't say I would ever even think, no matter what the cap rate and what the multiple is, buy a rent-stabilized building again.
And I won't land on a rent-stabilized building,
Okay.
regardless of LTV. Someone gave me a 20% LTV. I said it's just not worth it.
Yeah, not. So, free market buildings have performed well. Good cause eviction obviously has passed, which hinders rent growth. But always, it would have to be just something. I mean, listen, New York City at the end of the day is New York City, right? It's any of these deals that we look at out of state, the rents pale in comparison to what we're getting in New York. Even we talk about South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, we're good buildings in good areas. The rents aren't even close to what we're getting. So it always has that attraction. It always has the economy. New York City is not going to Miami. But at the end of the day, you have to be willing to have really the thick skin to deal with all of the compliance and politics. And I would say a really good deal.
Good deal. Okay. So that's my next question. Good deal. All right.
Do we get 2 questions? All right.
Can I get 2 questions?
Go ahead.
Okay. My next question is, so Joe, I know you're doing a lot of third-party management, and a lot of guys like Jason that shifted nationwide kind of gave over their portfolio to you to manage. How are you balancing, and there's also a lot of concerns, you also own a lot of real estate. How are you managing between owning and also doing right by, your third-party management clients?
So it's basically treated as one and the same. So the properties that I own and the properties that I manage are treated one and the same. Everything has to, on a manager level, we're not just managing a property like a third-party management. We're also implementing business plans. A lot of these owners come to us from the very beginning when they purchase the property. We're working with them to understand what the game plan is with the building. Is it to clear out violations? Is it to evict non-paying tenants or problematic tenants? So we're there from the very beginning all the way through execution and refinance. We provide all the documentations, correspond with the lenders and the brokers. So we're not just a typical management company that just doesn't have the understanding. That's our business. That's not our primary business. It's not our idea is help people execute from A to Z. That's our model. It's not just primarily focused on making money on somebody that owns a building and try to milk him for whatever he's worth. The idea is to let them make money, let them grow, so this way you do a lot more with them on all other segments. Management is just the base for operations.
Interesting. Thanks.
All right. Anyone else, or are we done? Oh, there you go. One more. Okay, I think this will be the last one. It has to be good, though, okay?
This is a question for Joe, who's my older brother. Firstly, who's your favorite brother? That's number 1. Number 2, why New York City?
I feel like this is a setup question.
Lisa? Of course, since you asked the question, what was the second question?
Why New York City?
Why New York City? New York City is one of the greatest cities and economies of the world. It's always been there. Coming with New York City is a lot of headache and compliance. I'm here. I live here. I see it in front of me. So I feel more comfortable just growing with the problems and learning how to solve the problems versus going somewhere where I'm going to continuously have to travel. It's also quality of life. You're here. We have a community here. We have a beautiful community here that Ezra is a part of as well. I don't see any other place in the world where I would go.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you to the panelists. Great job. I know I learned a lot from you guys, and thank you to the audience and the host.
Ezra, I have a question for you.
Oh, boy. This is not how this works, Joe. It's over. Okay.
Being one of the top lenders in New York City, how does that make you feel every day?
Makes me feel very grateful.
936. 36.
So
yesterday it was 2918.
So we closed about 10 loans today.
Yeah.
Really, I feel blessed and thankful and appreciative to everyone here who I work with and the Obed family and you. And really, it's a really big bracha. And
Amen.
It's just I'm a mikabel and I appreciate it. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.